Our next presenter is Miss Gemma Malungahu. She's a proud Tongan researcher currently working as a Pacific Research Fellow at the Australian National University in the Department of Pacific Affairs. Her research interests include Indigenous and Pacific research methodologies, Pacific health, public health, and society. So now I'm going to pass the time over to Gemma to begin her presentation.
Yes, malo apito. Malo lei ki mui ke whai haki I tā no te kau aki moi workshops ko eni ko maho inga apito ke o tomo atu kai whawhetai mai whamalo ki o tō mawhi. I nei tau hei tau mo ui vai vai tawa usia ai aho whakako ko eni. Whakatapu atu ki he komiti ngawe o e Confidentiality. Pea whakatapu atu ke te ki mo tō hana kotoa kau mai ki he ki I polo kalama ko eni. Ko ki ngā ko Gemma Malungahu, ko o wangamatua ko ke lepi mo Selina Malungahu. Ko ta mai ka o me kolonga ha tafu be ko whae ka o me tungua ha whewa mo ha pai. Thank you so much for the opportunity, everyone, for me to share with you some insights on Pacific Indigenous approaches or methodologies to research and therefore enhancing our learning. So just then I thought it would be important to first give thanks to God and I also did a whakatapu, which is a form of acknowledgement, acknowledging everyone in this Zoom session, and also whakawhiloaki, which is just introducing who I am and where I come from. So when undertaking researches, as researchers or learners or educators in general, it's really important that we locate our epistemological and ontological underpinnings, which informs the sort of like knowledge that we claim to be true or correct. And so if we want to think about ontology, it's similar to that of the study of reality or what exists or what is important to understand. And then epistemology is concerned with the question of how we know what we know. And so if epistemology is concerned with how human cultures construct knowledge, whereby all human cultures have epistemology because all human cultures have knowledge. So this point is critical because it has long been held that Pacific societies, whether you're Fijian, whether you're Samoan, whether you're Tongan, etc., also other called third world societies have been known to not have knowledge or they don't have epistemologies. And this is because in the West, having knowledge is sometimes correlated with the society's ability to document such knowledge. But as you know, as Pacific peoples, we were and are primarily an oral culture. And so writing was only just introduced to the Pacific Islands through colonial and missionary contact. But our unique form of documenting important stories, beliefs is shown through the use of symbols as a form of graphic communication. So we see these in our carvings, in our tapa, our tattooing, for example, and so forth. And so our people have come to, our ancestors had come to learn how to communicate through these various symbols. And it's only just now that we're learning to read and write and therefore use this as a form of communicating our worldview as Pacific peoples. So I just wanted to start off with that before I continue on with the next slide. So Pacific, what do I mean by Pacific Indigenous approaches to research? So I can acknowledge that most of you already in this breakout session are probably already currently doing your research or have maybe finished your research PhD or your master's, or you're thinking of doing research within education or academia in general. And so I just wanted to kind of introduce my somewhat gathered thoughts from literature about what Pacific Indigenous approaches to research are. And so firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that there is great heterogeneity between and within Pacific ethnic groups, where we are very diverse ethnically, culturally, and also linguistically. And there's this deep richness to our cultures, our traditions, our customs, and our values. And we also have our shared values as Pacific peoples as well. So for example, we all share the importance of family. And this extends beyond our blood or familial ties to include people from our village, our ainga, our kainga, our tribe, or our clan, etc. In conjunction with this, we also hold unique worldviews depending on our context or where we live or where we have grown up, of the time and the space in which we find ourselves. So for example, a person living in an urban or metropolitan area will obviously have very different worldview to those who live in a more rural or remote area. And this is the same in the Pacific region as well. Similarly, people in the diaspora would have different worldviews compared to people in the Pacific Islands. There's also this importance, when I think about Pacific Indigenous approaches, there's this importance of this decolonial or decolonizing nature. And it's based on the premise that research, like formal education or schooling, is an imposed system of doing. And it's comprised of structures and processes which bring with it philosophies and ways of learning and ways of knowing that originate in Western systems. And so it brings with it these sets of approaches, each about the assumptions about the world and human engagement within that world. And so there's these beliefs and attitudes and behaviors that's shaped by Western research that also mean that there are these certain mainstream ways of undertaking research as well. Sometimes as researchers, when we're going through the institution or the education system, we sometimes too blindly and unknowingly take on these various views about what research ought to be. But we know that this doesn't always necessarily fit or align with our Pacific peoples. So when we talk about Pacific research approach or agenda, we're talking about Pacific ways of doing research, or in other words, indigenizing research. So Indigenous approaches to research is about this transformation. It's about transforming the research space, and it's transforming the way we think, and it's transforming the way we do research as well. And so the ultimate expectation is that we, through practice, we might begin to engage in informed, committed, reflective decision-making, and so forth. Professor Linda Toiwai-Smith is a particularly important pioneer in her decolonizing methodologies work. So she's tangata whenua to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And if we go back to Ebeli Hau'ofa's work, and if we think about his work on a Sea of Islands or Pacific being seen as bigger than just the region itself, but including all our islands, encompassing all those that are connected through the ocean, Aotearoa and tangata whenua will also be seen as our Pacific brothers and sisters as well. Hence the importance of what Professor Smith explains in her research, which is tied to how European imperialism and colonialism, she says, has led that research is seen as like a dirty word within the Indigenous vocabulary. And this is because many of our communities, our Indigenous communities, have been exploited by researchers in the past. And so she argues that Western researchers and intellectuals make some incorrect assumptions about our people, about Indigenous communities, that they don't really understand or know. So her main argument is that as Pacific peoples or Indigenous people, we see the world differently, and we engage in ways that correlate with our worldviews. And so research ought to be transformed when we allow Indigenous ways of thinking to inform our research practice, and therefore the importance of revitalizing, reclaiming, reconstructing our ways of knowing, doing, and being in the research space. And so when I think about legitimizing our worldview, what I mean by this, it's about creating space and research, education, and academia to undertake research that is framed and informed by our epistemologies, our knowledge systems, our ways of doing, and our ways of knowing. And so it's not enough to just put a label on a project and name it Pacific, but it's important to really understand and prioritize our Pacific values and our worldviews, and how we frame and carry out research right from the planning stages, in terms of coming up with the research topic, developing that research aim and questions, right through to dissemination and reporting our findings and beyond, in terms of our relationships that we establish and maintain and sustain throughout your entire career as a Pacific researcher or academic or educator. So at the heart of the Indigenous world view, or the way we view research, is our identity. So as an Indigenous Pacific researcher, it's also important that we understand and acknowledge who we are, where we come from, our background, and how this informs our own worldview. And so I like to recall back to Dr. Francis Koia Vakauta, who describes the Indigenous worldview as governed by three main principles. And the first one she talks about is a deep spiritual sense of culture and place. The second one, she talks about connectedness with community, environment, and the wider cosmos. And then the third one, she talks about how these both principles that I mentioned collectively and also individually help to maintain and nurture relationships, which is really critical to maintaining balance and harmony towards cultural continuity and also survival. So really, there's this importance of, challenging this Western-centric process of research and learning and understanding. And it's about acknowledging the real pervasive forms of colonization and the spaces that we have come to work in, and the spaces that we have come to operate and function as Pacific Indigenous peoples. And so, if you're perhaps embarking on a new research project, or wanting to do further in terms of beyond what you're currently doing now, particularly when choosing a certain Pacific methodology, it's really important to be able to understand the community in which you're working with, and then also making sure that the methodology is aligned with their particular ways of knowing, being, and doing. So I just now like to take this opportunity to share just maybe one methodological approach or framework that I'm sure many of you are already aware of, which is the Gugala. I wish I had more time to be able to share perhaps other Indigenous approaches that you might be interested in. But I guess I chose the Gugala because, being Tongan, the Gugala was developed by an amazing Tongan professor, Konai Helu. I won't take too long here, so we can have more time to perhaps talk or just to discuss in general about your views of Pacific Indigenous research methodologies or frameworks. But yeah, so Gugala, I'm sure most of you know, involves three main processes. So it's likened to the process of making a garland or a flower necklace, if you want to say it like that. And so the first one is tholi, which is like gathering the flowers. You can imagine back in the islands when our mothers or aunties, our grandmothers would, in celebration for a significant event or a special occasion, they would usually go out of their way and collect flowers to make for a flower necklace or a kakala. And so this importance of tholi is about, choosing and gathering and picking the most beautiful flowers that you want for your kahoa or your necklace. So that's similar to that of the data collection phase within the research process. So it's similar to that of recruitment, but also going out to undertake your interviews or your focus groups or even your surveys, etc. Toi is the process of weaving together your flowers or your kakala that you've picked, that you've just recently gone out to pick. And so it's similar to that of the data analysis phase in the research process. So you're trying to make sense of which flower will look most beautiful next to what, and what makes sense in terms of what makes it more pleasing or more attracting to the person that you want to, for yourself as the weaver, but also for the person that you're going to gift it to, which is the next phase of the Gugala, which is loba, the gifting or the giving away of your beautiful garland that you had just made. So that's similar to the process of dissemination. So when you're finalized your report or you finalized your research findings and you're happy with what's been written in the project itself, and so now you're presenting your research or your findings back to the community, or giving it to or publishing it for people to use and inform policies, inform initiatives for our people. And it has these recommendations that ought to be important for the people that you had did research with. So since the development of this Gugala framework by Professor Gonai Helufeman in 1992, there has been further developments to the framework. So there's been added phases, added processes to these three main ones here. For example, that by Fua Johans in 2014, and I'm sure there has been further developments too. So these are just some extra phases or steps that has been added to the Gugala framework that just enriches it, and it has evolved over time. So you can see there, Nofo mo Deo is similar to that of the preparation phase, but it's before you actually go out and collect your data. So it's really about the importance of planning and preparing in a way that's more meaningful and purposeful to the people that you're going to engage with. So this is similar to that of education. You know, of course, there's a lot of preparation time that goes into preparing your classes or your lectures as academics or educators in general. And so this part is very, very crucial before the actual research or the engagement with others takes place. Engaging with the participants or the communities in which you seek to do research with. And then the other one there is Mamata. So it's about reviewing the skill of the weaver. And so that's kind of similar to that of evaluation. So making sure that one is evaluating or reflecting on the research that's been done, and, you know, can there be further learnings made from this? And if so, what are those? So that's some of the extra phases that has been added to the Gugala framework. I hope this has been somewhat useful to some of you, and I hope my little spiel on Pacific Indigenous approaches has been somewhat valuable or beneficial. And if not, I do apologize if everything I'm saying is just a repetition of what you already know. But kudos to you all for hanging in there with me. And now I guess I'll like to leave the last 10 minutes or so for just an open discussion, or any questions or comments that anyone wants to make in relation to just what I had just shared just now. So yeah, malo habito.
Malo Pito Gemma for your presentation today. It's been really insightful. I guess not only for me, but I hope for everyone else. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves, put it in the chat. If you guys want to have a discussion, feel free to discuss. I guess my one question for you, Gemma, to start us off is, what are some challenges, or what is a challenge that you faced during your research, and how did you, I guess, if you overcame it, how did you overcome it? If you didn't, what did you try and do to best overcome it, or try to?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Giovanna. I think one of the main things was probably early on in the research in my PhD, where there was a lot of, so the Western ethical protocols, as you all may be aware, is very different to how we view ethics, or how we view, you know, what's a proper way of engaging with our participants or people who are going to take part in the research. And so I remember my supervisor just telling me, okay, just write down, okay, this is probably, I hope this is not, don't quote me on this, anyone, because I might get into trouble. But I remember my supervisor telling me to just write down what fits or aligns with the Western ethical protocols in your ethics approval to send into the Human Ethics Committee. And then in practice, as we know, sometimes theory doesn't always align with what happens on the ground. And so in practice, I didn't really practice what I had written in the ethical approval application. And so I went ahead and did what I knew would be that's aligned with my cultural values as a Tongan woman. So you know, there's this whole thing about confidentiality and conflict of interest, where I remember getting comments back from the ethics committee saying that actually it's not good to directly ask your participants if whether or not they would like to take part in your research. But as you know, as people, we prefer, or our ideal of contacting our people is through face-to-face. great. It's never sometimes going through someone or bypassing through someone, depending on the context, it might be different. But in my case, it was really important to acknowledge and honor the person that I wanted to talk to. And so I needed to go face to face and ask them rather than going around someone else, another stakeholder, to try and get through to them. So it was really important that I'd done that. So I think that was also what led to the successful recruitment phase of having people be open to actually take part in my research, was that you know, that formulation or establishment of that relationship in the very early stages before any interview or before any focus group had taken place. So it was really important that I had done that. But in order to get your ethics approval, it was really important to just say what they want to say. But of course, in practice, that won't even work for our people. So that's how I was able to bypass the Western real colonial way of thinking when it comes to research. So yeah, very good question, Jovan. I have other examples, but if you would, yeah, I could share with these maybe perhaps one-on-one if someone wants to just maybe email me. I'm sure my email address is available to you all.
Definitely.
Yes. Oh, my lord.
I was just gonna pass it to Bennett Road. I think they had a question for you, Gemma.
Oh, it's not a question. I just want to say, Malo Apito, Gemma. I myself am of Tongan descent. But the Gugala framework is actually my side, so my bloodline is Henul. So it was very inspirational and very touching to listen to the works of the people of the people of my family, and that it's used in the Pacifica culture to strengthen and continue research into bringing Pacific education and making it stronger. So malo apito.
Oh, Malo Apito. Yeah, your family, your bloodline is amazing. And many of us researchers really take on and use the Gugala framework and how we inform our research. So thank you for that beautiful comment.
Thank you. So just to close up, I've just put a link in the chat for a quick survey. So if all of you guys could complete that, that'll be good. And I'm just going to pass it quickly to Kobe.
Just to wrap up, I'd like to say thank you, Gemma, for your presentation. I'm sure everybody has learned a lot from this presentation. And on behalf of the PICA team, we have organized a gift for you, just to show our gratitude for you.
Oh, wow. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, I wasn't really expecting a gift, but thank you I appreciate it so much. I guess that's our values, is the gift, generosity. So thank you for your generosity and your kindness. But honestly, you know, this VAR here, the space right here, and being able to share and just interact with everyone here, this is a gift in itself. So malo apito for the opportunity, and it's lovely to see some familiar faces, Inez, Dion, Mona, and everyone else here that I have never met, but it's nice to see you, and hopefully we could work together in the future on other things. But it's lovely to see everyone, and thank you for taking part in this particular workshop.
Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you. So we still have a few minutes left. So if anyone has any questions or any thoughts that they want to share, please feel free. If not, we'll just listen to, oh, yes, question. Perfect. Go.
Thanks, Gemma. That was really insightful and really enjoyed it. I have one question. So what advice would you give for non-Pacifica researchers when they conduct research with the Pacifica communities? So what's your suggestions?
Yes, that's a really good question. Thank you so much, Halaran. I apologize if I pronounced it wrong.
Yeah, that was really good.
So it's really important for all non-Pacific researchers, when seeking to undertake research with our people, it's really important to use a Pacific research methodology to inform your research, as well as to inform just your framing for the way that research is framed, making sure that it's framed from a decolonial and also indigenizing lens,
Yeah.
and it's non-deficit and non-victim blaming. So very much ensuring that we understand the external overarching structural factors that can lead to the various inequities that we see among our Pacific population groups. So we know that, a lot of our Pacific people face a lot of economic, political, social inequities. So poor social outcomes, poor housing, poor access to education, poor access to higher paying jobs. And so when we look at the higher up or upstream factors that have led to that, and we say the why rather than just explaining this is what it is and leaving it there, but going beyond that and explaining, it's actually these policies, or it's actually the issue of globalization that has led to this. It's actually the issue of colonization and the migration issues, right? So it's all these various factors that have led to these poor things, and it's about addressing and coming up with recommendations and solutions with our people, because it's our people that knows what's best for them, and then also addressing and acknowledging the ways that they have been undermined within society, politically, economically, socially, historically as well, and trying to develop more meaningful and purposeful ways of improving overall well-being and health of our people, and whatever area or field that you're seeking to do research in. But that's a really beautiful and very important question. So I thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you too. Love the answers.
Malo.
Yeah, so I guess we have maybe like a few minutes left, but I just want to say thank you again, Gemma, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for all your questions and your comments. If you haven't already completed the survey, you can complete that quickly. If not, you can head back into the main room. And I hope that you guys did take something out of it. I know I did. I learned something that I never knew before, and I really like the implementation of the Gugala framework in embracing the Tongan culture to explain, I guess, the Western ways that we do things. I think it's really important to use our culture to for different analogies, so then when you explain it to someone who I guess isn't really aligned with the Western ideas, they'll be like, oh, yep, I know what that means. And they'll get a better understanding and be more inclined to, I guess, participate in your research. So malo pito again, Gemma, and thank you, everyone.
Malo pito, everyone.